They laughed when the alien commander married a human. They stopped laughing when his blade split the sky. The grand hall blazed with lanterns from 100 worlds. Each flame represented a different civilization gathered to honor their champions. Marcus Webb pressed himself against the far wall, attempting to vanish. Impossible when you were the only earthborn creature in a chamber filled with beings who could bend steel with their bare palms. His wife, Commander Sira, stood on the elevated stage. Her crystalline skin refracted the light like fractured diamonds. Beautiful by any standard, even her own people's impossible expectations. 7 feet tall, with angular features that caught every glint and glow, she wore her dress uniform. Medals decorated her chest, honors from battles Marcus could only visualize in nightmares. For extraordinary bravery during the defense of Station 12 against impossible odds, we present the Nebula Cross to Commander Sira. The announcer's voice thundered through the architecture. The crowd exploded into applause. Sira lowered her head as the award settled around her neck. Marcus clapped alongside everyone else, chest swelling with pride. She had rescued 9,000 civilians that day. Fought for 18 consecutive hours without pause. What a waste, a voice rumbled behind Marcus. He didn't turn, already knew what followed. That one of our finest soldiers is shackled to such a fragile creature, another voice agreed. Look at him. No natural weapons, no protective plating, no fangs. What purpose does he serve? Marcus kept his gaze fixed on Sira. He had mastered the art of ignoring whispers. They followed him everywhere through coalition territory. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Alliance, universally considered breakable compared to nearly every other species. I heard he pushed paperwork, some kind of administrator. No wonder she never brings him to formal events. I'd be humiliated too. How do you prove your worth when no one will even look at you? His jaw tightened, but he stayed motionless. Anger would only confirm their assumptions. Humans were volatile, they would claim, unstable, weak in flesh and spirit. Sira finished her address, thanked her comrades and the Alliance for the recognition. As she descended from the stage, a massive crystalline warrior blocked her path. Commander Thane. Marcus recognized him immediately. Thane had served beside Sira for decades, never hid his feelings for her. Sira, Thane announced, voice slicing through the sudden quiet. You bring honor to us all with your bravery, but I must speak frankly, as a warrior should. Sira's expression hardened. Speak then, Thane. You deserve a partner worthy of your strength, a true fighter who can stand at your side in combat. Thane's gaze slid toward Marcus with undisguised disgust. Not a human who lurks in corners while you bleed. The hall went absolutely silent. Every eye turned to Marcus. He felt heat rush to his face but refused to move. This was Sira's celebration, not his battlefield. Sira's voice dropped to a dangerous frequency. You question my choice of partner? I question your judgment, Thane replied. What can this human offer you? Protection? He cannot defend himself. Power? An infant could overwhelm him. Legacy? He has never known battle. What happens when the Quiet One finally speaks? Marcus finally stepped forward. The crowd parted like mist before him. When he reached Sira's side, he placed a gentle palm on her arm. It's fine, he said softly. It is not fine, Sira snapped. But her anger wasn't aimed at him. I forget nothing, Thane said. I remember when you were the pride of our species, before you married this earth creature. Marcus met Thane's gaze calmly. The crystalline warrior towered above him by 3 feet, could likely tear him apart without effort. But Marcus had learned something during his years among the stars. Physical dominance wasn't everything. You're correct, Marcus said, voice steady. I'm no warrior like you. I cannot project energy shields or crush stone. But I love her. And she loves me. That's sufficient for us. Thane scoffed. Love, a human invention. Warriors need strength, not soft emotions. Then perhaps you misunderstand what makes a true warrior, Marcus replied. The crowd gasped. Several crystal beings hummed with low warning frequencies. Challenging Thane's honor was dangerous for anyone. For a human, it was nearly suicidal. Thane leaned down until his face hovered inches from Marcus's. Heat radiated from his breath. "You have courage, little human. Foolish courage. Perhaps you want to back those words with action." "Thane, enough." Sira stepped between them. "This is neither the appropriate time nor location." "She defends you," Thane said, laughing. "Like a mother shielding an infant. This is the partner of our greatest soldier. Pathetic." Something old and cold stirred inside Marcus. A memory, or maybe something deeper. His hand drifted unconsciously to the blade at his belt. An ancient weapon passed through his family line for generations. Most aliens found it primitive, amusing. A relic from Earth's distant past, useless in an era of particle cannons and deflection shields, but the sword felt warm beneath his fingers, almost aware. Before Marcus could answer, alarms screamed through the hall. The celebration lighting died, replaced by harsh crimson emergency beams. A hologram materialized in the chamber's center, a coalition officer with terror in his eyes. "Priority alert to all military personnel. Forward Base 7 is under assault. The enemy is the shadow entities. The abyss has returned." The hall erupted into chaos. Warriors rushed for exits, called for weapons and ships. Sira grabbed Marcus's hand, her eyes wide. "The abyss," she whispered. Marcus had heard stories, ancient tales of shadow beings that devoured entire planets, things even the mighty crystalline species feared. He had assumed they were legends, warnings for children, but the terror in Sira's eyes told him otherwise. "What do you do when the nightmare you thought was fiction becomes real?" "I have to go," she said. "Marcus, stay here, where it's safe." "Sira, please." She squeezed his hand. "I cannot fight if I'm terrified for you." Marcus nodded slowly. What else could he do? She was right. He would only be an obstacle. Sira kissed him quickly, then ran after the other warriors. Thane paused at the doorway, looked back at Marcus with something almost like pity. "Stay concealed, human. Leave combat to those strong enough to face it." Then he was gone. Marcus stood alone in the empty celebration hall. The nebula cross lay forgotten on the platform, its gleam dimmed by the emergency lights. Marcus looked down at his sword, the ancient blade everyone mocked. In the red glow, he could almost see something shifting within the metal. A shimmer like heat rising off summer asphalt. "Maybe," he whispered to himself. "It's time to stop hiding." He didn't know why he said it, didn't know what it meant. But deep inside, in a space beyond thought or reason, something ancient awakened and whispered back, "Soon." Marcus refused to remain behind. He pulled rank as a diplomatic liaison, a position he rarely used, and secured a spot on the transport heading to Forward Base 7. Sira hadn't been pleased, but she had too many other problems to argue. Now he sat in the troop bay, surrounded by soldiers who pretended he didn't exist. Crystalline warriors checked their particle rifles and energy daggers. A group of Helios shock troops, massive entities of living stone, meditated in silence. Even the pilot was a decorated veteran, a six-limbed Takari with enough combat experience to fill archives. And then there was Marcus, wearing a simple environment suit, carrying a sword that belonged in a museum. The vessel shuddered as it dropped from hyperspace. Through the viewport, Marcus saw Forward Base 7, or what remained of it. The station hung in space like a dying ember. Whole sections were simply missing, as if something had taken bites from the metal. The defense screens flickered weakly, barely holding. Worse were the shapes moving around it, dark things that seemed to drink light itself, leaving holes in space wherever they passed. "By the old flames," someone whispered. "There are hundreds of them." Thane stood at the front of the bay, his face grim. "Listen carefully. These creatures feed on energy. They will drain your shields, your weapons, even your body's natural power. Stay together, cover each other, and for the sake of all life, do not let them touch you." The ship docked through an emergency airlock. The moment the doors opened, Marcus heard screaming. Soldiers poured into the corridor. Weapons ready, Marcus followed. Stayed close to Sira. She had stopped trying to send him back. Instead, she assigned herself as his personal guard. Several soldiers grumbled about wasted resources. The base was a nightmare. Emergency lights painted everything in red and black. Bodies littered the corridors, faces frozen in expressions of horror. Some were dried husks, as if every drop of moisture had been sucked from them. Others looked peaceful, like they had simply fallen asleep and never awakened. How do you fight an enemy that grows stronger with every attack? They drained life itself, Sira explained, voice tight. Not just energy, everything that makes something alive. A shadow moved at the corridor's end, roughly humanoid, but its edges kept shifting, blurring. Where it touched the walls, metal corroded and crumbled. "Open fire," Thane commanded. Particle bolts filled the corridor with blinding light. The energy beams struck the shadow creature dead center. But instead of destroying it, the creature seemed to drink the power in. It grew larger, more solid, more real. "Cease fire," Thane shouted. But 3 more soldiers had already fired. The shadow creature swelled to twice its original size. Then it lunged forward with impossible speed. It tore through the front line like wet paper. Soldiers fell, their shields useless. Their energy weapons became liabilities. Every shot they fired only made the creature stronger. Marcus watched in horror as a Helios warrior, a being strong enough to punch through ship hulls, was touched by the shadow. The stone giant didn't even have time to scream. He simply crumbled to dust, his life force consumed in seconds. "Fall back!" Sira pulled Marcus away toward the ship. "Everyone fall back!" But more shadows were appearing, cutting off their escape. The soldiers found themselves trapped between the creatures, their most powerful weapons useless against an enemy that fed on energy itself. Thane roared in frustration, launched himself at the nearest shadow with only his claws and teeth. For a moment, Marcus thought it might work. Physical attacks didn't feed the creatures, but Thane's natural energy, the power that ran through every crystalline being, was still fuel for them. The shadow wrapped around him like a blanket, drinking deep. Sira screamed her comrade's name. She started forward, but Marcus grabbed her arm. "Don't," he said. "You can't help him that way." "Then what do we do?" Sira's voice cracked. "How do we fight something that uses our strength against us?" Marcus's mind raced. He had studied ancient warfare, back when he was a military historian for Earth's defense forces, before the incident that got him discharged, before he met Sira and left all of that behind. "Physical weapons," he said suddenly. "Old-style weapons that don't use energy. That's primitive," a soldier spat. "Useless against real threats." "What's more useless? Old steel or weapons that make the enemy stronger?" "More useless than weapons that feed the enemy?" Marcus shot back. He drew his sword. The blade caught the emergency lighting, reflected it in strange patterns. For just a moment, Marcus thought he saw those patterns form words, ancient words in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood. Strike true. One of the shadow creatures noticed him. It flowed toward him like smoke, ignoring the soldiers with their particle weapons. Marcus's mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But he thought of Sira, thought of all the people dying because energy weapons were useless, thought of Thane's mocking words about human weakness. Then he stepped forward and swung his blade. The sword passed through the shadow creature's form. Marcus expected it to do nothing, but where the edge touched, the shadow recoiled, not destroyed, but hurt, definitely hurt. The creature made a sound like tearing metal, pulled away from him, retreated into the darkness, left behind a smell like ozone and decay. Everyone stared at Marcus, at his sword, at the place where the shadow creature had fled. "How?" Sira whispered. Marcus looked at his weapon. It was glowing now, just faintly, a soft blue light that seemed to push back the darkness. "I don't know, but it worked." Thane pulled himself free from the shadow that had been draining him. The crystalline warrior looked weak, his facets dull, his breathing labored, but he was alive. He stared at Marcus with new eyes. "Your weapon. It has no power source." "It's just steel," Marcus said, "forged on Earth centuries ago." "Not just steel." A new voice spoke. An old woman appeared from a side corridor, leaning on a staff. She wore robes that marked her as an elder, one of the ancient beings who guided the coalition. "That blade carries something far older than steel, something the Abyss fears." "Elder Serix," Syrah bowed her head in respect. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting," the old woman said, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "Waiting for someone to remember what was forgotten. Young human, your ancestors fought these creatures before. Long before space travel, long before the Coalition existed." "That's impossible," Marcus said. "Humans only reached the stars 200 years ago." "You reached them again," Elder Serix corrected. "Your people have risen and fallen before, and each time you fought the abyss, each time you won, not with energy or advanced technology, but with something simpler, something pure." She gestured to the sword. "That blade is a key, one of many. The abyss has returned because the old locks are failing, and only humans can forge them anew." A roar echoed through the corridor. More shadows were coming, drawn by the commotion, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The surviving soldiers grouped together, but without their energy weapons, they were nearly helpless. Marcus looked at his sword, then at Syrah's frightened face. He thought about running, letting someone else be the hero. He was just a historian after all, a weak human in a galaxy of warriors. What happens when the person everyone dismissed is the only one who can save them? But his hand tightened on the sword's grip. It grew brighter, warmer, almost alive. "Get everyone to the ship," he told Syrah. "I'll buy you time." "Marcus, no." "Trust me," he said, meeting her eyes. "For once, let me protect you." Before she could argue, he ran toward the advancing shadows. His sword blazed with light, cutting through the darkness. Behind him, he heard Syrah shouting orders, organizing the retreat. Marcus didn't know if he would survive, but for the first time since entering Coalition space, he felt strong, not despite being human, because of it. 3 days passed after the disaster at Forward Base 7. Marcus spent most of that time in medical, not because he was injured, but because scientists wanted to study his sword. They ran every test they could imagine, found nothing special, just old steel and leather grip. Yet everyone had seen it glow, everyone had seen the shadows retreat from it. Elder Serix finally ended the tests. She ordered Marcus, Syrah, and a select few warriors to join her on a journey. Their destination was a place called Ember's Rest, a dead world on the edge of known space. She refused to explain why until they arrived. The planet looked like its name suggested. Grey ash covered everything, drifting in the thin atmosphere like snow. Dead cities jutted from the ground like broken teeth. In orbit around the planet floated thousands of wrecked ships. Some were recognizable Coalition designs. Others were older, stranger. A few were so ancient they had to be thousands of years old. "What happened here?" Syrah asked, staring at the graveyard of vessels. "The First War," Elder Serix said quietly. "When the Abyss first came to this galaxy, every species that could fight came here to stop them. Most never left. The ship descended through the ash clouds, landed near a massive structure. It was a temple. But unlike any Marcus had seen before, the architecture was wrong somehow. The proportions and angles made his eyes hurt to look at too long. But there was something familiar about it too, something that tugged at his memory. "I know this place," he whispered. "I've seen it before." "In dreams, perhaps," Elder Serix said. "Your blood remembers what your mind has forgotten." Thane stood with them, still weak from his encounter with the Abyss. The proud warrior had been quiet since the base, watching Marcus with a mix of confusion and grudging respect. Now he carried a simple metal spear instead of his particle rifle. Several other warriors had also abandoned energy weapons in favor of basic blades and clubs. They entered the temple through doors that opened at Elder Serix's touch. Inside, the walls were covered with carvings. They showed figures fighting shadow creatures. The figures were small, no natural armor or claws. They looked almost human. "Your ancestors built this place," Elder Serix explained as they walked deeper. "Humans were the first to face the Abyss, the first to learn how to fight them." "But humans weren't even spacefaring back then," Marcus protested. "How could they build something here? What if ancient humans had powers we've completely forgotten? They didn't need ships," the elder said. "They had something better. They had will." The group reached a large chamber. Holographic displays activated as they entered, showing scenes from the ancient war. Humans, thousands of them, standing against waves of shadow. They fought with swords and spears, shields and arrows, primitive weapons that glowed with the same blue light Marcus's sword produced. One hologram showed a human warrior facing down a massive abyss creature alone. His blade blazed like a star as he struck, and the shadow thing dissolved into nothing. "How?" Sira asked. "How did they make their weapons glow?" "They didn't make them glow," Elder Serix corrected. "The weapons reflect what burns inside them. Humans feel things deeply: love, hope, courage, desperation. Those feelings become real when facing the abyss. They become power, emotional energy." Thane sounded skeptical. "That's not possible." "Yet you saw it work," the Elder reminded him. "Marcus's sword glowed because he was protecting those he cared about. The abyss feeds on physical energy, yes, but they starve on emotions. Human emotion is poison to them." Marcus stared at the holograms. His sword felt heavier at his hip, more important. "What happened to them? The humans who fought here?" Elder Serix's face grew sad. "They won, at a terrible cost. They sealed the abyss away, using weapons of incredible power. Weapons forged from pure human will. These weapons became known as Heaven's Edge. But to power them, the warriors had to sacrifice everything: their lives, their world, their future. Only a handful survived, scattered across the galaxy. In time, humanity forgot its past, had to claw its way back to the stars the slow way. "Why are you telling us this now?" Sira asked. "Because the seals are breaking," Elder Serix said. "The abyss is returning, and humanity's new generation must take up the burden their ancestors carried." She led them to the center of the chamber. There, floating in a beam of light, was a sword. It looked similar to Marcus's blade, but larger, more refined. The metal seemed to shift colors as they watched, never quite settling on any shade. "The Sword of Morning's Wrath," Elder Serix announced. "One of the 7 Heaven's Edge weapons, forged by a human warrior named Sarah, who gave her life to trap the Abyss King himself. The sword has waited here for millennia for another human worthy to wield it." Marcus felt drawn to the weapon. His own blade vibrated at his side. As if recognizing its older sibling, he reached out slowly. "Wait!" Thane grabbed his arm. "If this weapon is so powerful, why not let someone stronger wield it? A crystalline being, a Helios. Because it will kill them," Elder Serix said bluntly. "The Heaven's Edge weapons respond only to human emotion. Any other being who touches them will be consumed. Even humans risk death. The power is too great for most to contain." Marcus hesitated. "Then maybe we should find another human, someone trained, someone—" Alarms blared throughout the temple. The holographic displays changed, showing the space around Ember's Rest. Dozens of abyss creatures were materializing, bigger than the ones at the base, tearing through the ship graveyard, feeding on residual energy in the old vessels. "They know we're here," Sira said, drawing her blade. "They've come for the sword." "Not just the sword," Elder Serix corrected. "They've come to destroy it. If this weapon is lost, we lose any chance of stopping the Abyss King." The soldiers formed a defensive circle as the temple began to shake. Somewhere above, the abyss creatures were breaching the structure. Marcus could hear stone crumbling, reality itself being torn apart. He looked at the Sword of Morning's Wrath, then at his own simple blade, then at Sira, who stood ready to die defending him, at Thane, who had overcome his pride to stand with them, at Elder Serix, whose ancient eyes held so much sadness and hope. What would you sacrifice to protect everyone you love? "What do I do?" he asked the Elder. "If you take the sword, you fight," she said simply. "You become what your ancestors were, a guardian against the dark. But Marcus, listen carefully. This weapon will change you. It will burn inside you forever. There is no going back." A wall exploded inward. Shadow creatures poured through the gap, flowing like water. They ignored the other warriors, focused on the floating sword. One touched the beam of light and shrieked, pulling back, but more came, testing the barrier, weakening it. Marcus didn't think. He reached out and grabbed the Sword of Morning's Wrath. Pain shot through him, not physical pain, but something deeper. The sword was testing him, reading his soul. It showed him every moment of weakness in his life, every time he had been mocked or belittled, every time he had felt inadequate standing next to Sira, every doubt, every fear, every shame. But it also showed him every moment of courage, every time he had stood his ground despite being afraid, every act of kindness when cruelty would have been easier, every day he had chosen to love Sira despite a galaxy that called him foolish. The sword found what it was looking for, something unbreakable at his core, something that refused to quit, no matter how hard the universe pushed back. Marcus's eyes snapped open. The sword blazed in his hand like captured lightning. The shadows screamed and retreated from the light. "Now," Elder Serix said, her voice filled with something like joy. "Now you begin to understand what it means to be human." Marcus looked at his reflection in the blade, barely recognized himself. His eyes glowed with the same blue light as the sword. Power thrummed through him, begging to be released. The abyss creatures charged. Marcus raised the sword of morning's wrath, prepared to show them exactly what humanity was capable of. Marcus moved without thinking. His body knew what to do, as if the sword carried memories of every warrior who had ever wielded it. He spun and slashed. Where the blade touched shadow, the darkness burned away like paper in a flame. An abyss creature lunged at Sira from behind. Marcus was there before she could turn, his sword cutting through the shadow's core. The creature dissolved with a shriek that echoed in dimensions humans couldn't normally perceive. "Marcus?" Sira stared at him. "Your eyes." He could see his reflection in her golden gaze. His eyes blazed with blue fire. Trails of light followed his movements. The sword felt weightless in his hands, like it was part of his arm, part of his soul. More shadows poured through the broken walls. Thane and the other soldiers fought with their basic weapons, but they were too slow. The abyss creatures moved like liquid nightmares, reforming after each strike. Only Marcus's blade could truly harm them. Elder Serix stood in the chamber's center, her hands moving in complex patterns. Energy barriers formed around the group, buying them seconds, but even she looked strained. "The temple cannot hold much longer. We must retreat to the ship." "No," Marcus said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "If we run, they'll follow. They'll destroy the ship, then hunt us across the galaxy. I can feel it. They want this sword destroyed more than anything." "Then what do you propose?" Thane demanded, skewering a shadow with his spear. The creature writhed but didn't die. "What do you do when running isn't an option?" Marcus looked at the largest abyss creature. It hung back from the battle, watching, testing, learning. It was bigger than the others, its form more solid, more real, and Marcus could sense something behind it, a presence that made his blood run cold. "Their leader is here," he said. "Not in the temple, but close. If I can reach it—" "You'll die," Sira interrupted. "Marcus, you've had that sword for 5 minutes. You don't know how to use it properly." "I know enough." Marcus moved toward her, cupped her face with his free hand. The sword's glow softened, responding to his emotions. "Trust me. For once, I need you to let me do this alone." Sira's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Come back to me." "Always," he promised. Then he ran toward the large abyss creature. It roared and charged to meet him. Marcus's sword met its shadow claws in a shower of sparks and light. The impact should have thrown him backward, but the sword's power flowed through him, making him faster, stronger, not physically, but in ways that mattered more against an enemy that existed partially outside normal space. He could feel the abyss creature's hunger, its endless need to consume. It had been feeding for eons, devouring entire civilizations. And still it starved. That was its weakness. It could never be satisfied, never be full, never be complete. Marcus pressed his attack, driving the creature back through the broken wall and out into the ash-covered wasteland. Behind him, he heard Sira calling his name. But he couldn't stop. The sword pulled him forward, showing him the path. The large creature led him away from the temple, deeper into the ruins of the ancient city. Other shadows followed, forming a circle around them. Marcus realized too late that he had been lured into a trap. The creatures attacked as one. Marcus spun and cut, his sword leaving trails of light in the air. He moved like water, like fire, like a storm given human form. Each strike destroyed a shadow, but more kept coming. His arms began to ache. His breath came in gasps. The sword's power was incredible, but it was burning through him, using his life force as fuel. He fell to one knee, sword tip touching the grey ash. The abyss creature sensed his weakness, closed in for the kill. Then something changed. The largest shadow creature began to grow. It absorbed the other shadows, pulling them into itself. Within seconds it had doubled in size, then doubled again. It became a titan of darkness, blocking out the dim sun, and Marcus felt the presence behind it grow stronger. A consciousness so vast and ancient that it hurt to think about. The Abyss King, not fully manifested, but close enough to reach through and touch reality. A voice spoke directly into his mind. It sounded like breaking glass and dying stars. "Little human, you carry an old enemy, a weapon that caused me pain once. But you are not the warrior who forged it. You are weak, unpracticed, afraid." Marcus tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. The sword's light dimmed. He could feel his life draining away, used up by the weapon's power. Elder Serix had warned him. This blade could kill even the one who wielded it. "You are right," he whispered to the darkness. "I've always been weak." The Abyss King laughed. The sound made Marcus's ears bleed. "Then why do you resist? Join me, become shadow, become nothing. It is so much easier than fighting." Marcus thought about that. How easy it would be to just give up, to let the darkness take him. He was tired of being mocked, tired of being the weak human in a galaxy of warriors, tired of seeing doubt in Syrah's eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. But then he thought about her smile, the way she laughed at his stupid jokes, how she held his hand when they walked through markets, how she had chosen him despite what everyone said, despite what she could have had. "I resist," Marcus said, forcing himself to stand. "Because that's what humans do. We're not the strongest, we're not the fastest, we're not the most advanced, but we never quit, we never surrender, and we never leave someone we love to face the dark alone." The sword blazed back to life, brighter than before. Marcus's eyes burned with blue fire as he raised the blade high. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It's not our weapons or our technology. It's that we choose to care, we choose to love, and we'll fight the whole universe to protect what we love." He charged the Abyss Titan. It swung a massive shadow claw at him. Marcus ducked under it and drove his sword into the creature's center. The blade sank deep. Light exploded outward. The Abyss Titan screamed. Its form began to break apart, shadows peeling away like old paint. But it wasn't enough to destroy it. The Abyss King's presence grew stronger, trying to force more power into its servant. Marcus felt the sword responding. It wanted more energy, more life force, more of him. If he gave it what it needed, he could destroy the Titan. But the cost would be everything. Syrah's face flashed through his mind. Their wedding day, her promise to grow old with him. The children they had talked about having someday. He couldn't pay that price. Not yet. Marcus pulled the sword free and retreated. Stumbling in the ash, the Abyss Titan reformed, damaged, but not destroyed. The Abyss King's laughter echoed across the dead world. "Weak," the voice mocked. "You cannot even sacrifice yourself properly. You cling to your pathetic life." "Yes," Marcus admitted, tears streaming down his glowing eyes. "Because, unlike you, I have something worth living for." Footsteps behind him. Marcus turned to see Syrah, Thane, and the other warriors emerging from the temple ruins. They had followed him, refusing to let him face the darkness alone. Syrah stood beside him, her blade ready. "You said to trust you. I do. But trust goes both ways. If you fight, we fight together. We fight." Thane took position on his other side. "I called you weak human. I was wrong. Weakness is giving up. Weakness is standing aside. You ran toward the darkness while others fled. That is strength." The other soldiers formed a line with them. None of them had glowing swords or magical powers, but they stood firm anyway, ready to die fighting rather than live cowering. What happens when an entire species decides they'd rather die than surrender? Marcus looked at them all, felt the sword respond to his emotions, not to his fear or his pain, but to his hope. his love for these people who had chosen to stand with him. The blade blazed brighter than ever before. "Together then," he said, raising the sword of morning's wrath. "Let's show this thing what happens when you threaten our galaxy." The Abyss Titan roared and charged. The battle was far from over. News of the battle on Ember's Rest spread across the galaxy faster than light travel. A human had wielded a Heaven's Edge weapon. A human had wounded an Abyss Titan. The story grew with each telling until Marcus barely recognized himself in the tales. Back on the Coalition homeworld, everything changed. Humans were no longer ignored or mocked. Scientists wanted to study them. Military leaders wanted to recruit them. Politicians wanted to make alliances. Overnight, humanity went from the weakest species in the Coalition to the most sought after. Marcus hated every moment of it. He sat in a medical bay while doctors examined him for the 100th time. The sword of morning's wrath rested beside him. Its light dimmed, but never fully gone. Using it on Ember's Rest had changed him permanently. His eyes still glowed faintly in darkness. He could sense abyss creatures from miles away, and he could feel the sword's hunger, always whispering at the edge of his mind. Elder Serix had explained that the sword was bonded to him now. It fed on his life force, slowly burning through him. She estimated he had maybe 10 years left, 20 if he rarely used the blade's full power. But every time he fought, every time he called upon its strength, he shortened that timeline. Syrah refused to accept it. She spent every free moment researching, looking for some way to break the bond or stop the drain. But Marcus knew the truth. This was the price of power. His ancestors had paid it. Now it was his turn. "You should rest," Syrah said, entering the medical bay with food. She had barely left his side since they returned from Ember's Rest. "The doctors say you're pushing yourself too hard." "There's no time to rest," Marcus said, accepting the food gratefully. "Every day the Abyss grows stronger. They're testing our defenses across the border, probing for weaknesses. Let someone else fight. You've done enough." "Have I?" Marcus gestured to the news feeds playing on the wall screens. They showed Abyss attacks on 3 different colonies. Coalition forces were losing badly. Energy weapons still fed the creatures. Traditional weapons worked, but required getting close, and most species weren't fast enough. "They need me, Syrah. I need you," she said quietly. "Not for 10 years or 5 years. I need you for a lifetime." Marcus pulled her close, breathing in her scent. She smelled like fire and steel and home. "I know, but if I don't fight, there might not be a lifetime for anyone." Before she could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Both of them rushed to the command center, Marcus grabbing his sword on the way. Commander Thane met them at the entrance, his face grim. "The homeworld is under attack. The Abyss has brought an army." Through the massive windows, Marcus could see them, hundreds of shadow creatures materializing in orbit around the capital world. Ships engaged them, but plasma fire only made them stronger. Fighters exploded as shadows engulfed them. Defense stations went dark as their power was drained. And behind the army, partially hidden in the darkness between stars, Marcus could sense it. The Abyss King, not just reaching through anymore, actually here. "He's manifested," Elder Serix said, joining them. She looked older than Marcus had ever seen her, as if the years she had cheated were finally catching up. "The seals have failed completely. The Abyss King has returned in full." "How do we fight it?" Thane demanded. "How do we stop it?" "We can't," the Elder said simply. "Not without all 7 Heaven's Edge weapons. Marcus has one. The other 6 are lost, scattered across the galaxy when the last generation of Guardians fell." Marcus watched the Shadow Army descending toward the homeworld. Millions of people lived on that world. Humans, crystalline beings, Helios, dozens of species, all mixed together. If the Abyss reached the surface, they would all die. "Then we make do with what we have," he said, making his decision. "I'll go out there, buy you time to evacuate." "Don't be stupid," Syrah snapped. "You saw what happened on Ember's Rest. One Titan nearly killed you. There are hundreds of them out there now." "She's right," Thane agreed. "This is a suicide mission." Marcus looked at his sword. The blade hummed softly, sensing his determination. It would give him power. Enough power to hurt the Abyss army, maybe enough to wound the Abyss King itself, but it would burn through his remaining years in minutes. He would be ash long before the battle ended. He was about to accept that fate when something unexpected happened. The command center doors burst open. Humans poured in, dozens of them, then hundreds. They came from every part of the station: civilians, soldiers, engineers, teachers, young and old. They all carried weapons, not energy weapons, but simple things: knives, clubs, metal bars, anything that wouldn't feed the Abyss. At the front stood Captain Nera Ven, Marcus's old friend from the diplomatic corps. She carried a steel pipe like it was a plasma rifle. "We heard what's happening. We're here to fight." "This is madness," Thane said. "You're civilians. You have no training." "We're human," Nera corrected. "That's all the training we need." She looked at Marcus, at his glowing sword. "You showed us what we could be, what we've always been. Now let us show you that you're not alone." Marcus felt something stir inside him, not the sword's power, but something deeper, something that had nothing to do with ancient weapons or cosmic wars. It was hope, pure, stubborn, human hope. And he wasn't the only one feeling it. Around the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, humans were waking up to their heritage. Simple tools began to glow in their hands. Hammers blazed with light. Kitchen knives hummed with power. A grandmother's walking stick burst into blue flame. What happens when an entire species remembers they were born to fight darkness? It wasn't just Marcus anymore. Humanity remembered what it had forgotten. They were the guardians, the ones who stood against the dark. Not because they were strong, but because they refused to be anything else. Elder Serix laughed, tears streaming down her ancient face. "I hoped. I dared to hope. But I didn't think it would happen so fast." "What's happening?" Sierra asked. "Awakening," the elder said. "When one human wields a Heaven's Edge weapon, it reminds the others what they are capable of. It spreads like wildfire. Every human with enough conviction, enough will to fight, becomes a weapon against the Abyss." Marcus looked at the hundreds of glowing humans in the command center, then at the screen showing thousands more across the homeworld. Reports flooded in from other worlds. Human colonies arming themselves with whatever they could find, turning basic tools into weapons of light. "It's still not enough," Thane said quietly. "Look, the Abyss army noticed the awakening. They've changed tactics, rushing toward the planet faster. The Abyss King's presence grew overwhelming. Reality itself bent around it, creating storms of shadow that consumed everything they touched." Marcus gripped his sword tighter. "Maybe it's not enough, but it's what we have. And I've learned something fighting the Abyss. They can't understand us. They can't comprehend why we don't give up, why we keep fighting when logic says we should run." He turned to face the assembled humans. "They think fear should control us, that being weak means being helpless. They're wrong. Being afraid and fighting anyway, that's courage. Being physically weak and standing up to monsters, that's strength. Being told you'll lose and trying your hardest anyway, that's human." The humans roared agreement. Their weapons blazed brighter. Marcus raised the sword of morning's wrath high. "The Abyss King wants to consume our world. Let's teach it what happens when humanity says no." Ships began launching from the homeworld's docks, not just military vessels, but civilian transports, cargo haulers, even personal shuttles, all carrying humans armed with glowing weapons. They flew toward the Shadow Army like moths toward flame. Marcus and Sierra stood together on the lead ship's bridge. She had found an old metal staff. It glowed in her hands, responding to her love for him. Their bond, it seemed, was strong enough to bridge the gap between species. "If we die out there," she said quietly, "I want you to know I never regretted choosing you." "We're not dying," Marcus replied. "I've got too much to live for." The ship entered the Shadow Army. Abyss creatures swarmed around them, but human-wielded weapons cut through them like light through fog. It was working. They were fighting back. But the Abyss King itself loomed ahead, a hole in space large enough to swallow moons. Marcus could feel it watching him, judging him, finding him wanting. Soon they would meet, and one way or another, this war would end. The battle raged around the homeworld like a storm of light and shadow. Marcus stood on the observation deck of a coalition warship, watching thousands of humans fight alongside alien warriors. It should have been impossible. Humans with glowing kitchen knives and metal pipes standing against cosmic horrors. Yet they were winning, slowly, painfully. They were pushing the Abyss army back. But the Abyss King remained. It floated in space like a wound in reality, absorbing the shadows of its fallen servants and growing larger. Marcus could feel its attention focused on him, on the sword at his hip, on the light that hurt it so badly millennia ago. Elder Seric stood beside him, her staff dim. She looked frail, as if the battle had aged her centuries. "You know what you have to do." "Kill it," Marcus said simply. "Seal it," she corrected. "The Abyss King cannot be killed. It is hunger given form, emptiness made real. You can only trap it again, lock it away where it cannot feed. And that requires all 7 Heaven's Edge weapons," Marcus said. "But I only have one." The elder shook her head slowly. The original 7 weapons were crafted by 7 warriors, each representing a different aspect of humanity. Courage, hope, love, sacrifice, determination, compassion, defiance. But the truth that was forgotten is this: those aspects exist in every human. You don't need 7 swords, you need 7 humans willing to give everything. Marcus understood then, the terrible cost that was about to be asked. "It will kill them." "Yes," Elder Seric said softly. "The sealing ritual burns through life force like paper in a furnace. The original Guardians sacrificed themselves to trap the Abyss King the first time. They knew they would die. They did it anyway." "Then I'll do it alone," Marcus said firmly. "I'm already bonded to the sword. My life is already forfeit. Let me be enough." "You can't be," the elder said. "One light, no matter how bright, cannot contain that much darkness. You need others. 6 others willing to stand with you until the very end." Marcus looked out at the battle, at the humans fighting and dying, at Sira commanding a group of warriors on a nearby ship, at Captain Nera leading civilian volunteers, at all the people who had believed in him when everyone else called him weak. How could he ask them to die? How do you ask people to sacrifice everything when you know they'll say yes? As if reading his thoughts, Elder Serix touched his shoulder. "You won't have to ask. They'll volunteer. That's what humans do." She was right. When Marcus explained the situation over the fleet-wide communication, silence fell. Then voices began speaking. Hundreds of volunteers, thousands. Every human in the fleet was willing to give their life if it meant stopping the Abyss King. Marcus's vision blurred with tears. These people, mocked and belittled throughout the galaxy, were ready to sacrifice everything for species that had looked down on them. In the end, he chose 6. Captain Nera Venn, his friend since they were both young diplomats, a teacher named Grace, who had awakened her power to protect her students, a mechanic called Henry, whose wrench glowed brighter than any plasma torch, a doctor named Leo, who had used his scalpel to save dozens during the base attack, a young girl named Sophie, barely 16, whose determination was fierce enough to light up the dark, and a grandfather named Thomas, who said he had lived long enough and wanted his death to matter. Sira protested violently when she realized she wasn't chosen. "I'm your wife, I should be with you." "That's exactly why you can't be," Marcus said, holding her close. "I need you to live, Sira. I need you to remember me, to tell our story, to make sure humanity never forgets what they're capable of." "I don't want to be the one left behind," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know," he said, "but someone has to survive to make this sacrifice worth it. Please, let it be you." She kissed him, fierce and desperate. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his. "I'll remember. I'll make sure the whole galaxy remembers. Everyone will know the truth about humans. About you." The 7 chosen humans gathered on a small transport ship. Marcus had expected fear or regret, but he saw only determination. They knew what was coming. They chose it anyway. Thane insisted on piloting them toward the Abyss King. The proud crystalline warrior had changed so much since that first day in the celebration hall. "I mocked you once," he said, as they flew into the darkness. "Called you weak. I was the weak one. too blind to see strength when it wore a different face. "You see it now," Marcus said. "That's what matters." The transport entered the Abyss King's presence. Reality bent around them. The ship systems failed one by one. But they didn't need systems, they had something better. The 7 humans stood in a circle, weapons raised. Marcus's sword blazed at the center, but the others' weapons glowed just as bright. A pipe wrench, a teacher's ruler, a scalpel, a metal rod, a simple knife, a walking stick. Tools of peace turned into weapons of war by the sheer force of human will. The Abyss King spoke, its voice making the ship's hull scream. "You think 7 lights can contain me? I have consumed galaxies, devoured entire realities. What are you but insects before a storm?" "We're human," Marcus said simply. "That's enough." They struck as one, 7 weapons piercing toward the Abyss King's core. Blue light erupted brighter than stars. The Abyss King roared, thrashing, but the light held it, wrapped around it like chains. Marcus felt the sword drinking his life, not years anymore, but seconds. He could feel the others fading too. Sophie's light dimmed first. She smiled as she disappeared, her last words a whisper. "Tell my mum I was brave." Thomas went next, his old body unable to sustain the power, but he laughed as he faded. Actually laughed. Now that's a way to go. One by one they fell. Each death made the chains brighter. Each sacrifice bound the Abyss King tighter. Henry, Leo, Grace. Captain Nera gave Marcus one last nod before she vanished into light. Then it was just Marcus alone before the Abyss King. The monster was trapped, but not sealed. One more death, one more sacrifice, his. But as his life drained away, Marcus felt something unexpected. The humans who had died weren't gone. Not completely. Their light remained woven into the chains, their will, their determination, their hope. It was still there, still fighting. And across the galaxy, billions of humans felt it too. They had awakened to their heritage. They had remembered what they could be. That memory, that awakening, fed power into the chains. Not life force, but something that transcended individual existence, collective human defiance. The Abyss King screamed as it was dragged down, sealed not just by 7 deaths, but by the combined will of an entire species saying no to the darkness. Marcus's vision faded. He could see Sira on the communication screen crying his name. He wanted to tell her it was okay, that he wasn't afraid, that he loved her, but his voice wouldn't work anymore. Then Elder Serix was there, somehow, in the space between life and death. "There is another way," she said. "Not the way of the ancient guardians. A new path. But it requires sacrifice of a different kind." "What kind?" Marcus managed to whisper. "To truly seal the Abyss King forever, someone must guard the prison. Watch over it for all time. They would exist partially outside normal reality, like I do. Living but not living. Present but distant. It would be a half-life, Marcus. But it would be life." "Do it," he said without hesitation. "You'll see your wife again," Elder Serix warned. "But you'll never truly be with her. You'll watch her age while you remain unchanged. You'll see her die while you continue on. Are you certain?" Marcus thought of Sira alone, grieving. He thought of humanity's future, protected by his watch. He thought of all the people who had sacrificed themselves so he could make this choice. "I'm certain," he said. "A half-life with her is better than an eternity without her." Light exploded. The Abyss King was sealed, the chains locked into place. Anchored by Marcus's transformed existence, he became the guardian, the watcher, the lock that would never break. When he opened his eyes, he stood on the homeworld again. But everything was different. He could see energy flows invisible to others, feel the Abyss King's prison, distant but present. The sword had become part of him, no longer draining his life, but sustaining it in this strange new state. Sira ran to him, threw her arms around him. He was solid enough to hold, real enough to touch, but there was a distance now that hadn't existed before, a barrier he couldn't quite cross. "You're alive," she sobbed. "You're here." "Yes," he said, holding her as close as he could. "I'm here, and I always will be." He didn't tell her about the cost. Not yet. There would be time for that later. Time for everything later. He had all the time in the world now. The galaxy celebrated. Humans were hailed as heroes. The species who had been mocked and belittled had saved everyone. The homeworld declared a new holiday, Remembrance Day, honoring the 7 who had died and the countless humans who had awakened to their heritage. Thane became the ambassador between crystalline beings and humans. He spent his remaining years teaching anyone who would listen. That strength came in many forms, that the weakest-looking being might carry the brightest light. The coalition restructured. Humans were given seats of honor. Their unique abilities were studied and respected. Never again would they be called weak. Never again would they be ignored. Marcus watched it all from his strange half-existence. He walked beside Syrah as she became a teacher, showing young warriors that power and compassion could coexist. He was there when she accepted honors in his name. There when she gave speeches about the day her husband lit up the heavens. She aged gracefully, her crystalline skin dimming from bright diamond to deep amber. Marcus remained unchanged, forever young, forever watching. It hurt more than he had imagined, every year that passed, every grey facet that appeared on her beautiful face, a reminder of what he had given up. But he never regretted it, not when she smiled at him, not when she held his hand and felt real warmth, even if it wasn't quite the same as before, not when she whispered that she loved him, and he could still say it back. On her deathbed, surrounded by their adopted children and grandchildren, Syrah looked at Marcus with those golden eyes that had never stopped seeing him as strong. "You gave up everything for me," she whispered. "For us?" "No," Marcus corrected gently. "I gave up one life to keep you in another. That's not sacrifice, that's love." She smiled. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Everyone called you weak. They were fools. You're the strongest person I ever knew." Then she closed her eyes and was gone. Marcus felt the loss like a physical wound, but he didn't break. Couldn't break. He was the guardian now, the watcher, the light that kept the darkness at bay. He stood at her funeral, invisible to most, but the humans could see him glowing softly in the shadows. They nodded to him, acknowledging his sacrifice, acknowledging what he had become so they could live. Years turned to decades, decades to centuries. Marcus watched as humanity spread across the galaxy, no longer timid, but bold. They became leaders, teachers, protectors. They never forgot what they were capable of, never forgot the day they had awakened. And Marcus stood guard, forever vigilant, forever watching, forever the sword that had lit up the heavens to drive back the dark. Sometimes in quiet moments, he would visit the memorial they had built for the 7 who had died. Their names were carved in stone that would last forever. Marcus Webb, Nira Venn, Grace Miller, Henry Park, Leo Chen, Sophie Adams, Thomas Wright. They called them the 7 Lights, the ones who had proven once and for all that humanity's strength wasn't in their bodies or their technology. It was in their refusal to give up, their determination to protect what they loved, their willingness to stand against the dark no matter the cost. Marcus would trace the letters of his name, remembering the man he had been, the one who was called weak, the one who had proven them wrong, and then he would return to his watch, keeping the galaxy safe. One human standing against the infinite dark, not because he was strong, but because he was human, and humans never quit. If you made it this far, hit like for the Ascension of Man. Share this with someone who needs to remember what humans are capable of.